The scriptural context for today's message comes from the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. Here's the story of Jesus and the Canaanite woman. It reads, Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from the region came out and began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and implored him, saying, "Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us." But he answered and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she said, "Yea, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from the master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. Now, I will admit, this biblical passage has always bothered me a bit, because taken at face value, it appears that Jesus was being partial and biased by serving his own kind, and quite insulting by implying that the woman was a dog. Now, I don't know about you, but from my neck of the woods, those would be fighting words. You called me what? Such a tale does not work in the modern sense, also because today most of us have the understanding that the woman's daughter in the passage is most likely suffering from mental illness, not demon possession. While I understand that these ancient texts should not always be taken literal or applied to our more modern context, there are some truths that can still be gained from them. Although this passage says a lot about Jesus, in my opinion, it highlights the power that one unnamed Canaanite woman had when she challenged authority on the behalf of someone she loved. Even through insult and humiliation, she pressed. And perhaps this could be better understood if the story was retold in a more updated fashion. Fast forward some 1,800 years. Here's a tale of yet another woman who did something extraordinary. It was not that she had more than others, but that she simply refused to give up, to be sent away, to remain silent. The woman in this story is not a nameless Canaanite woman. She is an American. Her name is Dorothea Dix. Today, in our continuation of the summer sermon series, Heroes, Heroines, and Heretics, we will examine the life of Dorothea Dix. She was one such person who dared to stand up against injustice in her day, in a time when few women were able to influence social change. She became impassioned at the plight of those whom the society had deemed mentally insane. Many of these individuals were often abused and institutionalized in deplorable and demeaning conditions. Her work challenged the status quo to the transforming of lives, of systems, and political parties. Dorothea was born into a troubled childhood on April 4th, 1802, in Hampton, Maine. Her father was a poor Methodist minister, a drifter and alcoholic. At 12, she moved to Boston to live with her wealthy grandmother. There, she became acquainted with some of Boston's elite and came under the influence of what she believed to be a more reasonable religion, Unitarianism. It was quite the distance from her hellfire and brimstone Methodist childhood. In Boston, Dix developed a powerful network of allies, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Horace Mann, and the Reverend William E. Channing, for whose children Dix served as a nanny. Now, the reasons why I am speaking about Dorothea Dix today is because they told me to. It's because, let me correct that for the record, is because I am inspired by her impact. But also I have an interesting story about her, or shall I say about me. See, I first ran across her name about 5 years ago. I just came on staff here at the church, and I had an office right up here behind the choir stand. There's a row of offices there, and I was in 205, and I shared that office with the pastoral care minister. And right at 206 was this room that always stayed shut, but out on the side of the door, it had Dorothea Dix. So I thought that was her office. For about 3 months, I kept getting up and looking down that hallway to see if she was going to ever show up for work. So I figured I had to share my office with somebody else, and she got the office by herself, and she ain't never here. I even had an attitude about it. And y'all up here laughing like I'm the only one. Now, how many of you done walked up in that hallway and saw those names and thought, I want to see them? Come on, tell the truth. There we go. I got one out there. I got a witness. Acting like I'm the only one. Now, Dix did not truly discover her true passion or her life's work until she was nearly 40 years old. The legacy she left us began, according to storyteller Elizabeth Ellis, when a fellow church member, a Mr. Nichols, came to her home one afternoon, asking quite nervously if she would consent to leading a woman's Sunday school class. She thought the request was silly because she had been leading Sunday school classes for most of her life. He contended, but it's where you will be leading the lessons. Just so happened it would be at the Cambridge County Jail in Massachusetts. The jail was a great deal to ask of any respectable woman of that day. Dorothea was certain that such would garner much gossip. Nevertheless, she consented. But before the quite relieved Mr. Nichols could leave, she asked him if there were any insane people at the prison. Taken aback, he wondered why she would want to know of such things. Certainly, they were there. He went on to tell her something that would forever alter the course of her life. He said that the mentally ill were forgotten by all and kept in horrible conditions. If they had come from a wealthy family, they might have been given a bed in a private hospital. But the insane poor were mostly kept in jails and prisons. The poor had no choices, no say in anything, and no one had spoke out on their behalf. He concluded, it's a miserable existence. Dorothea would ponder on his words long after he left. Sunday arrived, and the lesson was finished. While the guard was preparing to lead her out of the facility, Dorothea asked. She asked to see the women who were insane. The jailer laughed at her request and kept moving her toward the exit. She stopped and asked again. This time, his refusal was more adamant. A lady like yourself should not even be in a place like this. Why would you want to see the crazies? He questioned. They are possessed. It's unnatural. It's evil. But Dorothea would not let her request be denied. Finally, the jailer agreed. He led her down to a dark, cold dungeon. The stench was so great that it made her nauseated. The jailer grinned at her discomfort, but that only served to strengthen her resolve. As they drew closer, the noise of the people shrieking and groaning became as overwhelming as the odor. Once there, Dorothea asked the jailer to open one of the doors. Reluctantly, he did. Once inside, she saw 2 wooden cages, each with a half-starved figure of a woman, clothed in rags. Each was covered in dirt and their own filth. It was winter, and the room's floor was partially covered in ice. The jailer said, "Not a pretty sight, is it?" Dorothea left that day determined to gather enough information on the condition of those who were mentally ill, and then to petition on their behalf. For the next 18 months, she traveled the length and breadth of Massachusetts, places where most did not know existed, cataloging the mentally ill and the conditions in which they were held. Powerful people tried to prevent her investigation. Many others tried to deny the truth of her findings. Society matrons scorned her. She was criticized in the newspapers and even condemned by the clergy. Go figure. She was called an immoral woman, a liar, a busybody. But like the Canaanite woman, Dorothea refused to be silenced or deterred. In January 1843, she presented her petition before the state legislature. The immediate goal was to secure funding to increase the size of the state hospital for the insane in Worcester. In Gothic vividness, Dix declared, "I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within the Commonwealth in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained naked, beaten with rods, lashed into obedience." In her petition, hers was the only voice. Through her eyes and through her calls for sympathy, she made others see what they had been unwilling to look at. In that moment, she held a monopoly on perspective. Her petition was a powerful indictment against the cruel and irresponsible practices of jail wardens and almshouse keepers. Her petition caused such an uproar that lawmakers voted to add 200 beds to the only hospital in the state for the mentally ill. Far from being satisfied, Dorothea moved on to Rhode Island and began an investigation there. Faced with the same condemnation, she not only persevered but succeeded in securing increased funding from the legislature. And when her work was done there, she moved on to New Jersey and then on to the next state and on to the next state. In his essay on Dix, Dr. Graham Warder of Keene State College says, quote, "Her life is an example of what one committed person can do to affect change in the lives of others. Her efforts took her outside the acceptable cultural norms of behavior for women. In 1843, women could not vote, and respectable women were expected to remain within the private sphere, the world of children, morality, piety, and home. Women had moral authority, but no political power. Dix became an effective and active political lobbyist in the state and the federal levels of government. And she assumed a public role very rare for a woman of her generation," end quote. You see, for many generations, it had been thought that insanity was caused by social conditions and patients should be removed from family, friends, and community. And then there was a social stigma of having a mentally ill person in the home that encouraged many families during this period to put their mentally ill members away. These were the early stages of the mental institutions and the asylums in the U.S. And as time went by, any small improvements were met by new challenges. By the turn of the century, up until the mid-1950s, mental institutions and asylums were overcrowded, hopeless places increasingly separated from the outside world. These isolated institutions became testing grounds for controversial and dangerous treatments such as electroconvulsive therapy and lobotomy. Such treatments helped some patients, but they reinforced the idea that asylums were places no one wanted to end up in. And we have all seen the pictures, seen the movies, and read the stories of horrific abuse. Today, mental disorders are quite common both in the United States and internationally, and are the leading cause of disability in the U.S. An estimated 26.2% of Americans ages 18 and older, about 1 in 4 adults, suffer from a diagnosable mental disorder in a given year. This figure translates to 57.7 million people, and many people suffer from more than one mental disorder at any given moment. And the illnesses cover a wide range of dysfunction or disabilities, from serious intellectual or developmental disabilities to schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and many, many others. The number of people seeking supplemental security income, or SSI, or Social Security disability insurance for mental disorders have increased nearly 2.5 times since 1987. That one has to wonder why then, in their last legislative session, Oklahoma legislators would cut nearly $20 million from mental health and substance abuse services. Surely, the decrease in funding has not reduced the number of individuals needing service. Now, it has been many years since Dorothea's day, and while we have made some very positive advances, I will say that enough is being done to meet the ever-growing challenges. And in some ways, the changes have not been for the best, especially for people with mental illness. And we have not gone untouched. In our own neck of the woods, many of you may have heard of HISM. If not, I would encourage you to just Google the term HISM, that's HISSOM, in Oklahoma, to find hundreds of comments, good and bad, about the now closed Oklahoma institution. HISM was an 85-acre compound near Sand Springs, Oklahoma, which served the mentally disabled. And in the mid-1980s, a group called Homeward Bound brought a suit against the center in hopes of closing it down because of the harsh treatments of its residents. At one point in its history, HISM had over 300 cage-like cribs in its possession. Homeward Bound's philosophy focused on placing patients into communities and integrating them into society as much as possible, contending it was more humane and much cheaper than institutionalization. Indeed, court-appointed observers reported a prison-like atmosphere and considered HISM a human development emergency and an educational disaster. A federal judge ordered the facility closed in 1987. I asked, how did we get it wrong? See, even in my fundamentalist Christian days, I was led to believe people were indeed possessed by demons and they needed to be cast out. And I know that there are those today who still hold to such dangerous notions. And if we do not learn from the past, I heard someone say that we are doomed to repeat it. Perhaps the only demons we are facing are our own demons of ignorance and intolerance. Facing these does not require an exorcism, but the courage to take an honest look at our own attitudes and preconceptions and then do something about it. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to go off script a little bit here. You see, I realize that I know a lot of people with mental illness. They seem to be attracted to me for some reason. But as I begin to think about that attraction, I realize maybe the problem is with me. Maybe I'm thinking I'm too normal. When I realize that people are all going through different changes in their lives, and at any given point, we have all been touched. Yeah, y'all were quiet like y'all the sanest folks in here. I know that we all have been touched with bouts of insanity at some point in our lives. And the truth is, you let somebody else tell it, they'll tell you the truth. But we are healers of one another. And I know some of you may be suffering today. And if you are, I want you to know that there are people who care. You are not alone. Just reach out. Someone said, I will be there. You see, I realized that if it had not been, you see, you don't know what I've been through. And I don't know what you've been through. Some of us have been through so much stuff that we should have lost our mind. We should have lost it all. We should have passed that brink of no return, but something happened. If it had not been. Now you can fill in on your own blank there, right? If it had not been, for some people they might say, if it had not been for God who was on my side, I would have lost my mind. Somebody said, if it hadn't been for my mother who prayed for me, who stayed with me and counseled me. Somebody might say, if it had not been for that friend that I could count on in the wee hours of the night, I would have lost it. But I'm so glad. I'm so glad I had someone to call on. Okay, I'm getting back on track now. I feel a little something up here stirring. But let me get back to Dorothea. There are many people in our communities who still suffer in silence. They have few true advocates willing to speak out or speak on their behalf. We see them on the streets and under the bridges. Many of them are our veterans who return from war zones with severe mental and psychological issues that have led to a great number of suicides and cases of spousal abuse and a great number of other ills. And with the decreases in funding, many poor people again are being sent to prisons and jails. And I'm a witness because I volunteer at David L. Moss County Jail, and I can tell you that they are there. The poor are there. Or they should be treated at some other facility. They're in jail because they are poor. So I say in some ways, the more things have changed, the more things have stayed the same. I also worked at the Bias Corporation in Sapulpa. Now, Bias, from Greek for better life, is an organization that promotes healthy living for individuals with developmental disabilities. Their mission is focused on helping care recipients to live the best lives possible. Aspects of their company's philosophy mirror tenets of our own tradition, primarily those which honor the value, dignity, and worth of all people. I can recall during training that great emphasis was placed on seeing the individuals as whole persons with choices and rights to be respected. In most cases, these individuals had severe developmental disabilities. Some were even nonverbal and required assisted living. But in all cases, I want to tell you, in all cases, those dealing with such illnesses, whether a veteran returning from war or a biased resident or a depressed young person, all deserve our patience, our concern, and our respect. And Dorothea Dix was one of the first to recognize this. In an 1874 hospital report, Superintendent Eugene Grissom wrote, "It was discovered that the insane were not beasts and demons, but men whom disease had left disarmed and wounded in the struggle of life, and whom not unoften some good Samaritan might lift up and pour in oil and wine and set anew on their journey rejoicing." And this is the primary goal of my message to you today, as I believe was the purpose and vision of Dorothea Dix. It is in seeing and accepting those with physiological developmental and other mental illnesses as whole persons, complete, without lack. In her long career, Dix would travel throughout the country to lobby for the construction of asylums by the states and even the federal government. She played a direct role in the establishment of 32 state institutions in 15 different states for the care of the mentally ill. The influence of her work would have a national impact that continues today. Dix never married. She spent her last years in declining health, residing as a guest at the visitors' quarters of the New Jersey State Hospital in Trenton, an institution her lobbying had helped to build. She died there in 1887. In the superintendent's report after her death, Eugene Grissom wrote, "For more than a half a century, she stood in the vanguard of humanity, working valiantly and unceasingly for the stricken insane. Difficulty never stopped her. Distance never worried her. Opposition never daunted her. Refusal never subdued her. Pleasure never tempted her. Ease never lured her, and fame never attracted her. Her objects were the wretched insane. Her field was the world. Her thought, the relief of the suffering. Her success was their redemption. And her crown shall be the gift of him like whom she went about, doing good. Earth bids farewell to this great spirit who has given, if possible, new beauty to the name of woman and new splendor to the deeds of charity." End quote. Wow. Such a beautiful epitaph for a life well lived. A life that refused to accept no for an answer. Was she a heroine? Indeed. Was she a heretic? Indeed. But she was also a healer, an advocate, and a visionary. Her work shed light on what goes on in those dark places of existence and what happens when marginalized people are kept out of sight, shut off from the eyes of care and concern. I will be seen. I will be heard. She relentlessly raised her voice on the behalf of others. She refused to be silent, refused to go away. And in the end, one might say that her life's work still speaks on the behalf of others as it does for Dorothea Dix. And may it also be said of us that because we were willing to speak out for those who could not speak for themselves, that when our voices have been silenced by the advent of our final rest, that the lives we have lived will indeed in that day speak for us. May it be so.